Today, I am going to continue on my series of teachings on Tong Len, which means taking and sending. And it's a Mahayana practice of developing love and compassion for all beings, including ourselves. So we all suffer. We know we suffer. But on the other hand, we like to separate ourselves from suffering. We want to get away from our suffering. And Tong Len encourages us to make friends with our suffering, to get to know it, to go beyond the fear that keeps us from making friends with our suffering, and to understand the causes of uh, our suffering and the suffering of all sentient beings. That the causes have to do with our confusion and our actions that plant karmic seeds. Basically, we separate that which is not a self into a self, and that which is not other into other. And then we engage in actions of body, speech, and mind based on this misapprehension, this confusion about self and other. And we engage in all kinds of actions that are egocentric or self-centered, and they create karma. And karma then plants these seeds of suffering in the future. But it's important to realize that our suffering is not punishment by another being. It is a result of our own actions, and that with a deep understanding of Buddhism and Buddhist psychology, and with practice and so forth, we can engage in actions that will create positive karma, and we can actually control to a certain extent what our future will be. So we're not hopeless, we're not helpless. We can learn how to, you might say, use the law of karma to our advantage. And the Buddha talked about different kinds of suffering, and we hear it over and over and over again, and we get almost like, okay, yeah, I know that, let's go on. But it really is good to contemplate from time to time, to step back and really look at these four sufferings that the Buddha talked about in his first teaching on the Four Noble Truths, that birth is suffering, that babies come into the world crying, and once they are born, they now have inevitably, they're going to die sooner or later. And in between, they experience sickness. For instance, now we've got this pandemic of COVID, but there's lots of other kinds of sicknesses that are going on. And then old age, and then finally death. That once you're born, there's no way to get out of this alive. And then he talked about suffering in a different way. He talked about we experience not getting what we want. Sometimes we get what we want, but it's very common to not get what we want. Or if we get it, to just want more and then not getting enough. Another thing that happens to us is we get what we don't want. And we all have a long list of things that we have experienced that we didn't want. And then on top of that, there is what is called all-pervasive suffering. And that is underlying the whole thing is fear, anxiety, uh, resentment, anger, and all kinds of other confused feelings that are not apparent, but when push comes to shove, they arise. On the other hand, when a person experiences egolessness, this, for that moment at least, disappears. And suddenly it's like a breath of fresh air, and you realize how oppressive this all pervasive suffering and how pervasive it is. For us, we are so familiar with it because we've never been separated from it. We don't even recognize it. All of this is just teaching us the futility of samsara, the futility of trying to, you might say, turn a lump of coal into a diamond. That samsara is pervaded with suffering of these different kinds. And no matter what we do, we cannot be free of them. And we've been trapped into this mindset since the beginningless beginning. But now we are extremely fortunate. We've made a connection with Buddhism, with the great teachers of the Kagyu lineage. And we have begun to work with getting out of this mess. And it begins with, or I shouldn't say it begins with, but part of it is taking responsibility for ourselves and working with ourselves, rather than trying to manipulate people and the outer environment so that things, our suffering is lessened or decreased. And no matter how much we try to manipulate the outer environment, you might say convince other people to behave certain ways towards us and so on and so forth, it just doesn't work. But we still keep on trying, it seems, in various ways. And so the question is, if you can't change your own mind, why do you expect to change the mind of another person? Yet we do that all the time. We argue with people, we debate with other people. We just tell them, you know, this is what I expect, or whatever. And we think that somehow or another that that's going to make things better. When in fact, if we turn our minds inward and realize that these expectations we have about other people and circumstances, we need to look inside for why we feel this way and work with that. And this is one of the functions of Tong Len. Another way to put this is, if you don't love yourself, how can you love others? So we have to go within and really learn how to love ourselves, to learn what love really is. My first talk on Tong Len, we had an exercise that we did about learning to love ourselves unconditionally, regardless of our actions or our thoughts about ourselves. So it's important that we learn how to love ourselves, and through that really investigate what love really is like. A lot of times when we love other people, uh, we are doing it because we're expecting them to return it. And if they don't return it, then at some point we just kind of don't find that we really love them after all. Tralek Rinpoche, this is not a direct quote, but he has said something like this, that if you don't love yourself, you go around like a sponge, soaking up the drops of love that others leave behind. So we really need to understand love, loving ourselves, and what loving others is. And it is ultimately without conditions. We can't start there. So we start working towards that direction. It's not an all or nothing sort of situation. So samsara, this cyclic existence, it means circling over and over and over, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. But the same thing happens within our own lifetime. A lot of times we keep, you might say, fighting the same battles over and over again. And that doesn't produce happiness. And so our solution is, it's not working, so let's just do more of it. And so we work harder, try to accumulate more money, try to impress other people, and on and on and on. And then we find we're back to the same place and we wonder what happened. Again, I can see this in my own life, and I have conversations with students in private or with people that aren't students, just plain ordinary beings that don't see me as their Lama, aren't even Buddhist, and they're having difficulty, and they've had a difficult person in their lives, and they've had this difficulty for decades. And they're still behaving the same way now as they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. And you wonder what's wrong with that person. And they try to change it by changing the other person's mind, and they don't like the relationship the other person sees between the two of them. But this person accepts the relationship that the other person has and is fighting that. Whereas it's their own mind that has developed this relationship. And I kind of compare it with a tennis game. You get into this relationship and one person serves, and you are, through your habitual patterns, swing at the ball and hit it back. And then they, you've been playing this game for decades, they hit the ball back and you're compelled to hit the ball back. Well, don't hit the ball back. See what happens. You don't have to hit the ball back. It's your own habitual patterns. So we really need to work on our habitual patterns. And then we don't have to wonder why we're back in the same place, why my life is a soap opera and it's reruns. Now, it's important here to distinguish between the relative and the ultimate of who we are. Ultimately, we are the Buddha. The Mahayana analogy is the sun and the clouds, that our Buddha nature is like the sun, and the clouds are our confusion. And through various techniques, meditation, contemplation, study, and so forth, the clouds gradually part and the sun, which has already always been shining, shines through. That's our Buddha nature. Now, from the Mahamudra level, which is a step above Mahayana, but Tibetan Buddhism, or the Kagyu lineage, the highest teaching is Mahamudra. So I want to bring that in here. On the Mahamudra level, our ultimate nature is beyond concept. That they talk about suchness and isness. And here is a short verse. It's about the sun. Sunspots and flares, perfection unnecessary. The sun is what it is. So our Buddha nature is beyond, in the Mahamudra teachings, even beyond good and bad. And this is why we practice. We do Mahayana to clear the clouds away. In Mahamudra, you might say the clouds are the sun. There is a phrase, the last line in the Four Dharmas of Gampopa is, grant your blessings that confusion dawns as wisdom. So ultimately, we're going in the direction to realize that this confusion is actually nothing less or nothing more than our Buddha nature that we've unrecognized. On the other hand, relatively, we live in a world that is confused, that is created by karma, our habitual patterns, our mental conditioning, that we are born into our birth family due to our karma, not as punishment, but it's just because of our karma. And the teachings on Tong Len talk about the look at the suffering that your mother experienced in her life. You can also look at the suffering that your father experienced in his life. And I've actually been looking into this a little bit more deeply the past month. I've been looking at it, you might say, a long time, since really since before I even came to Buddhism. And I knew Mom was suffering. I knew she was suffering greatly, but I didn't know why. I had my suspicions, and then in December, my speculation was confirmed when I learned that my mother had been repeatedly sexually assaulted as a girl. And not only that, but I've been doing some research online at a particular ancestry website, and I found out the actual person that did it, and his relationship to my mother, which was a cousin who was working for my grandfather, and he was living in the house at the time. And well, I started to say prayers for that man. I'm sure he needs them. But this again helped open my heart to my mother and her suffering. And again reinforced what I had come to feel anyway, was not anger towards her, but compassion for her and the suffering that she experienced from that time on, and took with her to her grave. And then I looked at my father, and my father's parents, my grandparents, were immigrants, and they came to this country, one from Sweden, one from Norway. They left their family behind. My grandmother on my father's side had a baby out of wedlock, and she left the baby behind. They came here and they got married. And I suspect that both of them left for reasons that had a lot to do with suffering. And my father was very intelligent. And on the other hand, his father was a butler and lived at the mansion rather than at home, and probably came home only occasionally. So my father probably never had much of a relationship with his father. Because he was very intelligent, he kept skipping grades. He was in college at the age of 15. And back then, this was 1935, I'm sure they did not have any kinds of a program to prepare you for college. That suddenly there he was at 15, he was in college, full of strangers. This was the middle of the Depression. And then 2 years later, his father died. And a question that comes into my mind is, what is it in my father's, let's say in his mind, that he was attracted to a young woman who was deeply traumatized by being sexually assaulted just a few years earlier? On the other hand, they were married for 74 years. And to outsiders, they looked like they were very, very successful, happy, and so on and so forth. But when I look deeply like this, I just see lots and lots and lots of suffering there. So it's important for us to look at our parents and realize that there's a lot of things that we don't know about them, a lot of things that they haven't told us about, talked about, and the same thing for our grandparents. But it is them that have given us our present body. And because of interdependence, all these things came together, and here we are. And as I go back and look at my great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents, just a huge amount of people come into the family tree. And all of them have had some influence on where I am at the present time. As I said, I'm Scandinavian right here in Wisconsin. There are a lot of Scandinavians. They're all over the place. And the same thing in Minnesota. There's a lot of Scandinavian jokes that Scandinavians tell each other, and so forth. And that's part of my history. And it's good for us to look at our history, culturally, how we got to where we are, and to respect this and not try to escape it, but work with it. So beyond that, it's important to see that our situation is so incredibly wonderful that we've been born in a human body. We've been born in a country where Dharma is present. You know, these are part of the thoughts that you contemplate with precious human birth, that our bodies and our minds are good enough so that we can use them to travel the path. We have an interest in the Dharma. We've met these great Dharma teachings. We're practicing, studying, contemplating. You know, there was a lot of talk a few years ago about the 1%ers. Well, we're not even in the 1,000th of a percent. We're in a much smaller, incredibly fortunate group of people. And to move on, it's good to see our suffering from an aerial point of view. In other words, get some perspective. And again, this is why I was talking about my particular background and my particular family. Because when I started out as an adult, I had a lot of anger towards the way I was treated as a child. And my parents. And the more I came to work with Buddhism and work with my own suffering, my own unhappiness, my own conflicting emotions, I was able to let go a lot of that anger and develop some compassion and forgiveness and so forth. But as I have just stated, it has continued. And now I'm seeing that this goes on from generation to generation to generation. And to just realize that in a way we fit right in. And this isn't ancestor worship. This is just recognizing interdependence. So we can appreciate the benefits we have received from our parents and our grandparents and so forth. And I've gone over some of those. That even if you had a very difficult childhood, you did survive. You know, you made it. You didn't die in childhood. That you were taken care of well enough so that you survived. And probably, what would I say, became an adult in much more than, wow, I just survived. That when I look back, I realize that I have received some good habits that my parents had, and that I received some, you might say, bad habits too, but I have been able to use the teachings of the Buddha and the practices of the Buddha to transform some of these bad habits into good habits, to use them for growth. So in a way, we're fortunate that we have this rich material for growth to work with. So love, very simply, is defined as wanting beings to be happy. That its source is our mind. Love is the radiance of our mind. And since mind is limitless, so our love is limitless unless we limit it. And at the present time, we are limiting it. But the more we learn to give love, the more love we have to give. It's that simple. That if we can uh, encourage ourselves to give more through the Tong Len practice, for instance, we'll find that we have more to give. And that giving of love will bring happiness with it. That Tong Len works this way. It's one small step at a time, but little by little by little, we make progress. The six paramitas are the heart of the Mahayana path. And so I'm going to go over them briefly here as they relate to Tong Len. The first paramita is generosity. And here we are giving love. We're giving the antidote to suffering. We breathe in the suffering of another being, and we exhale what we feel is the antidote to that suffering. If it's fear, we give our bravery. If it is that they're suffering from a disease, we mentally inhale the disease and then give back our health. If it's poverty, we give back mentally our money, and so forth. The next paramita is discipline. And this very simply is engaging in beneficial actions and avoid harmful actions. So Tong Len works in that this focuses our mind on engaging in mentally beneficial actions to other beings. And it is in direct contrast to our ego wanting us to take on everything that is good and giving back everything that we don't want. So it takes discipline to engage in Tong Len. And it is very beneficial for us to have this kind of discipline. Patience is the next thing. And this means that be with whatever difficulties arise mentally or otherwise, being, you might say, unperturbed, the best that we can. And if we do, work with it, just do it. Don't look at Tong Len as a zero-sum game, which means that whatever you give, you'll get back an equal amount of. Even if it's thinking, by doing this exchange, then I'm getting back an equal amount of merit. Just do it and be patient. Diligence is the next paramita, and that is having a sense of joy. Joyful exertion is frequently used to explain diligence. So joy in wanting to help other beings being happy. Joy in that you are engaging in bodhisattva training. That you're actually doing something very, very important. But on the other hand, very ordinary. In a way, you're just acknowledging your ultimate nature. The next is samadhi, or one-pointed concentration. And so when we're doing this practice, it's more difficult to maintain concentration than it is following the breath, because it agitates our mind. We're doing things that we would not normally do. And so by keeping our minds, bringing our minds back to the Tong Len practice, we're strengthening our one-pointed concentration. And the sixth paramita is wisdom. And that is here, seeing the illusion-like quality of this practice, realizing that, yes, this is all in my own mind. But on the other hand, it's still a practice, that this is not solid. I'm just visualizing this happening, and so on. I'm going to go on. I was really inspired to write this talk this morning, and we're going to have a little bit longer session than normally. When you look around, whether it be ads on the internet, ads you get in the mail, emails you get for various things. I got an email today from flowers.com, send flowers to your loved one. And of course, it was full of a very smiley, happy, young, beautiful person. So we get these messages all the time of smiley, happy, young, good-looking people that are having a good time. And in my case, I get them with smiley, happy, good-looking old people having a good time. And it's easy to unconsciously compare ourselves to these images, or to our friends, our neighbors, wealthy people, famous people, and measure ourselves and think that something's wrong with ourselves. And very simply, we need to just let go of these kinds of comparisons. That what you see may have nothing to do with what actually is. As I was writing this, I thought about, or what came to mind was a Simon and Garfunkel song that came out in 1965 that had quite an impression on me, and it was called Richard Cory. You can Google the lyrics if you like, but I went to the actual poem which inspired the song. And this was written in 1897, soon after a significant depression in 1893. So this is how the poem goes. It's shorter than the song. Whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown, clean favored and imperially slim. And he was always quietly arrayed. He was always human when he talked, but still he fluttered pulses when he said, "Good morning." And he glittered when he walked. And he was rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought that he was everything, to make us wish that we were in his place. And on we worked and waited for the light, and went without meat and cursed the bread, meaning the bread they were eating instead of meat. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. So we don't know what other people are carrying around, and it's pointless to make comparisons. Compassion is the point. I did a brief internet search, and I think Bloomberg figured this one out, that Elon Musk is worth $292 billion. Is he happy? Why is he working so hard to be in space? Why has he had so many wives? What's going on in his life? So the point is, the change comes from within. We need to work with ourselves. We need to work with our own pain. And that's where Bodhisattva training starts. So ideally, before a Tong Len session, we would meditate first. 10 minutes is a good amount of just shamatha meditation, calming the mind, following the breath, coming back to the breath when you get distracted. We're not going to do that today. And then do the Tong Len, and then do again some meditation afterwards. Before you start, generate the intention that I'm doing this to benefit all sentient beings. Then, if possible, just flash on open space. Just for a minute, drop all thoughts the best you can. And then start with the practice. Now, in the first session we did in the first Tong Len class, we did this exercise, opening the heart. And it was about loving yourself. And if you were present for that and you found that helpful, it might be good to do that from time to time, especially if you have some resentment, anger, and so forth towards yourself. If you feel that you're unworthy, if you feel embarrassment about who you are, and so forth. Then, and you can go to my YouTube channel and look at this if you want to review it. So if you've got anger and loathing towards yourself, lack a lot of self-confidence, feel that you're not as good as other people, it might be good to do this practice from time to time. But then you don't want to stay there. This is just a beginning point. Then you want to work with someone that you're close to, but is different from yourself. I was actually looking at the Lojong teachings this morning, and the first card about Lojong is first start with yourself, by the way. But then we contemplate somebody that is close to us. Traditionally, it would be our mother. In my case, it could not be my mother, but I used my grandmother. But somebody that you feel close to, and then you put them in front of you and you do this exchange. And I did this in the second talk. And as your confidence in yourself and your ability to do this practice grows, it's good to put somebody else that's more distant, but you still have this friendship for, or at least are neutral towards. And we work gradually and gradually further and further away from our circle of friends till we get to people that you might say we're neutral about. And then eventually we'll put a person that we have an aversion for, a mild aversion at first, because it's difficult to do that. And I'm not going to go that far today, but today, let's begin by, for a couple of minutes, doing the exchange with ourselves, and then doing the exchange with a person that we feel very close to, and then spend the bulk of the time on a person that maybe we're friends with. And we know that they are suffering for some reason or another. It could be that they have COVID or just had COVID, or that maybe they lost somebody or somebody in their family, and so on and so forth. But somebody that you're friends with and you know that they just had something very painful happen to them. So let's begin. Well, to conclude, I did not mention going over the black light carrying with it the suffering of the person in front, or white light coming from you and soaking into the person in front, carrying what you want to give them. I was assuming you had heard that before. But anyway, are there any questions or comments about what we have done this afternoon? The question is to please review bodhicitta and what that is. It has different aspects. One is aspiration bodhicitta, which is that I want to be able to lead all beings to becoming fully enlightened. And the other is actually doing something to make that possible, which means it's developing yourself. It has been described as the difference between looking at a map and traveling on the road. So it's good to, at the beginning of the a particular Tong Len session, or actually any practice session, to have this aspiration that may I be able to develop to the point where I can lead all beings to attaining enlightenment. And then when you're doing the practice, you're actually doing something to make this aspiration possible. Now, to make this a little more complicated, that's relative bodhicitta. Absolute bodhicitta, or ultimate bodhicitta, is what I talked about at the very beginning, where it is beyond concept. Mind is suchness or isness. It's beyond good and bad, beyond coming and going, beyond anything that we can think of. The comment was made about how, well, yes, I really don't know that much about my ancestors, but I do feel this connection with people, cousins that I haven't seen in 40 years. But on the other hand, I feel this strong connection to Tibetan Buddhism, and that certainly isn't in my ancestry. And so we have here two things. We've got the actual physical material world, and then we have mind. And our mind it takes rebirth over and over and over again. And in our present body, it has come about through our ancestry, through our parents. But our parents, they had parents. Without those parents, my parents wouldn't have come into existence. And so on, back, maybe to the primordial ooze when life first emerged. I don't know. But on the other hand, we have had countless lifetimes from the beginningless beginning. And of course, that it's not, we could have been anything in our past life or our endless series of past lives. And the teachings are to regard all beings, even insects, as having been a mother to us in a past life, or a brother, or a sister, or an aunt, or an uncle, or a child, and so forth. So we have both of these things going on. We have our mind and the karma that our mind has accumulated, and then we have the physical body that our mind is in at the present time. And when I say our mind is in, it's because that's the way we look at it. If we were a Buddha, we would realize that our mind has no location. It has no center and no edge, and therefore it is limitless. So the question is about when we're doing Tong Len, are we on the relative level or the ultimate level? And we're on the relative level, because at the ultimate level, there is no other being. It's described this way: from the relative level, if it was one mind, everyone would be enlightened when the Buddha was enlightened. And so that's the level we're working at, is our confused mind and the confused mind of the other person we're doing Tong Len with, where there is this separation of self and other, but we're kind of breaking down the barriers. Now, on the ultimate level, the answer is it one mind? The answer is it's not two. So this goes back to, the logic of the Heart Sutra, that if you say that it's one, that's conceptual, and the ultimate is beyond concept. So we're working at the relative level. You might say, well, we're looking towards understanding at the ultimate level. The question is that so far, you and I, probably other places, they always talk about humans, your mother, your friends, your enemies, and so forth. Why don't we talk about insects? And fine, put an insect in front, take on their suffering, or a mouse, or a rat, or whatever, because they're a sentient being and they suffer. The main suffering that is described with the animal realm is very, very strong stupidity, lack of common sense. They just are strongly driven by habitual patterns. And if you look at an insect, they're very predictable. It might be if you had a collection of flies You might see differences in their behavior. I've never tried that, but it's pretty predictable. And the same thing with mice. It might be that if you had mice in a laboratory, you could teach one to run a maze, and you put two of them then in the same maze, and you could tell by how fast they solved the maze which one was which. But and they might even, I don't know, have a personality. I'm not sure. I know you get up to the higher animals, and dogs have personalities, horses have personalities, cats have personalities, and so forth. So there's definitely this, and even an insect will try to avoid you from killing it. If it feels it's in danger, it will do something to protect itself. So that is kind of how I would sum that up. If you want to do it with an animal and you feel that, you're not faking it, that you really want to do help that animal, then go for it. So the question is about insects, and how does it access a precious human life? Because an insect obviously is not capable of understanding the Dharma and practicing it and so forth. And the Buddha used this as a comparison that, and I'm not going to get this story exactly right, but it's meant as an analogy anyway, that you have this vast, limitless ocean with an ox yoke. They're made out of wood, and they're made to fit around the neck of an ox. They're used when you're using an ox to plow a field, for instance. And so this ox yoke is floating around in this limitless ocean. The waves are moving it around, the wind is moving it around, and you have a sea turtle that has a special ability. It only comes up to the surface for air once every 100 years. And the chances of an animal getting born in the human realm are better than that sea turtle sticking its head up through the ox yoke. So if you are born in the animal realm, it takes a long time to get out. Kalpas. Now, the Tibetans, they feel this way. This is not directly stated by the Buddha, but they feel that an animal that is destined for the human realm, and I heard this from Tai Situ Rinpoche, and I also talked to Khenpo Ujin about this, by the way, just so I'm telling you where I'm getting this from, that the Tibetans feel that an animal that is destined for the human realm, their last animal birth will be that of a dog.